saying Shavua Tov, everyone. I hope this is the beginning of a wonderful, peaceful, and healthy week for all of us. I think it's certainly going to get started in a wonderful direction. And I'll turn it over now to the chair of our Special Programs Committee, Abraham Tesser.
Hi, thanks to all of you for being here. It's my pleasure to introduce Ed Halper. Ed is a fascinating person. His life is an odyssey in trying to understand the fundamentals of our world. He started out by studying physics. That turned out to be not quite as truthy as he had hoped, so he moved on to study math. Eventually, of course, he became a philosopher. Judaism comes in many flavors. We often see Jews from a background that is highly observant of traditional laws and practices become less observant. Ed's understanding of the world has led him in the opposite direction. That is, to become more traditionally observant. Ed is an open, modest person. He thinks deeply, acts with integrity, and shares his knowledge with very great clarity. Tonight, he will talk about Kabalah and Jewish mysticism.
Arlene, do you want to come in and listen to this?
No.
Ed?
So thank you, Abraham, and thank you, Jessica. That was really beautiful, and boy, the great clarity part might be a little hard to live up to with this topic, but I'll try to do that as best as I can. I don't know if you can see my background. I'm coming to you from Sfat, is a town in Israel that has associations with Kabalah. Seem to be the appropriate background. So I'm going to let me say first of all that what I want to do is impossible. I'm going to give you an account of Kabalah. I'm tempted to say standing on one foot, although I'm actually sitting down. It's an enormous subject, and I'm just a beginner, and I can't actually do more than just scratch the surface. So you will not find what I say adequate. You may not find it intelligible. I'm certainly not interested in persuading you to engage in this, in the study of it. But if you do feel that that's something you want to do, maybe this talk will help you to have some sense of a direction. So I don't know if I can. Should I be in the center of this? I don't know how I'm appearing on your.
Yeah, I have you pinned, Edward, so everyone should see you in a kind of a large rectangle.
Okay, good. I don't see myself that way. That's all right. I don't have to be large. But anyway,
Soon.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, let me begin by noting that there are at least three different approaches to Kabalah, and the first one is a scholarly approach. It was introduced by a man named Gershon Shalom, who was the first person to write on Kabalah as a real academic subject. He was born in Germany, had a German education, eventually moved to Israel, and he explored the other side of Judaism. He was concerned to show that there was more to Judaism than just rationality. And he explored it in a way that was very historical. He read everything that was available. Kabalah is an enormous subject, and it goes back. We have 1,000 years, at least, maybe 2,000 years of works on Kabalah, on Kabalah. There's three main ones. I'll talk a little bit about them later on. But Gershom Shalom seems to have read everything and did a lot to form the academic study of the subject. Secondly, the second approach is something that you might be more familiar with. It's a mystical approach. It's the people who say, I want to find something deeper in Judaism and connect with spirituality in a deeper way. And they turn to Kabbalah as something that's a Jewish version of meditation, a Jewish version of, say, some of the Eastern philosophical ideas. And there's a large range of thinkers who have been involved in this. One person I'll mention is a man named Aryeh Kaplan, who translated the Sefer Yetzirah, one of the main Kabbalistic works, and himself engaged in various forms of meditation and advocated it, taught it to people. But it also has become, there are sort of more popularized versions of it than Kaplan. Some of them you'll be possibly familiar with, like, and maybe easier to connect with. Kaplan was quite learned. The third approach, which is my approach, is through philosophy. The people who are writing Kabbalah did not necessarily write in a philosophical way. It's not like reading Plato or Aristotle, but it is like reading some of the philosophical works that were written after among a group of people called Neoplatonists. And it bears a great deal of similarity to Neoplatonic work. Okay, so my approach is the philosophical approach. I don't exclude the other ones. I've learned a lot from them, but that's what I'm going to talk about today. So the problem of Kabbalah, what is it all about? There are two philosophical problems that are basic to Kabbalah. The first one is a Neoplatonic problem. It's a problem of how it is that a God, which is completely and totally a unity, could create a world that has plurality, diversity within it. And if you think about it, somewhat miraculously, we think, well, God said the world would let there be light, and there was light, and we have the steps in the first chapter of the Torah. But it's a huge gap from complete unity to the world that we live in. And the problem was, what comes in between that? What is it that stands between the unity of God and the kind of world that we live in, of diversity and plurality? And the Kabbalistic answer is, there is a kind of defined plurality that is a kind of chain, and it starts from God, and it proceeds downward with greater and greater degrees of diversity. So there are, I'm going to talk about this, 10 fundamental sefirot, and if you can allow me to share my screen. Can I do that? Is that?
You should be able. Let me. It might take a second, but
that's okay. I don't have to do it right now. Let me talk about the other problem that Kabbalah faced, and this is a standard problem for medieval Jewish philosophy. It's called Ta'amei HaMitzvot. It's the explanations for the mitzvahs. Everybody knows there's 613. It seems like there are a lot more when you count the rabbinic injunctions. But the medieval Jewish philosophers asked the question, why do we have them, and what do we do? What is it that are performing a mitzvah? What does it actually result in? So when you make Havdalah, as we just heard, what is it? What actually happens? So one of the most popular approaches is that of Maimonides, who was not a Kabbalist. Maimonides says, at somewhat greater length than I can say here, performing the mitzvahs actually is a way of cultivating morality and preparing yourself to understand the world and God in a deeper way. It's all a personal endeavor. Now, this approach is antithetical to Kabalah, because Kabalah wants to say that in performing the mitzvot, we are actually changing, transforming the world. And that means there's a kind of metaphysics that's involved in Kabalah that you don't find in Maimonides. There's plenty of metaphysics in Maimonides, but not in respect of the mitzvot. Okay, so those are the two problems. And now I'm going to try to share my screen here, if I can. I actually,
you should be able to.
yeah, that's what, now I have to find it where it is. Yeah. Okay. I actually downloaded a lot of pictures and then somehow they disappeared. Okay, let's try this one here. Can you see that? Can everybody see it?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so I lost everybody. I can get Zoom back up here. No, it's not what I want. You saw it before here. Here. There we go. Okay, so so this is the standard so-called tree of life. This is the arrangement of the 10 sefirot, and it's a picture you probably encountered before. And I will, let me just say that this arrangement is a little bit misleading, because one of the things that happens with the sefirot is that they move around. They don't stay where they are. But this is the canonical arrangement, the canonical representation of them, with one exception. Now, let me just note at the top there is Keter, crown, and then to the right of that, Chokhmah, wisdom, left Bina, understanding. These three are the intellectual sefirot. And the 7 that are underneath of it are sometimes identified as the midot, the emotional side. But you have to understand that emotions and intellect are not quite what this is about. But let me note something here. Underneath of Chokhmah and Bina are Chesed and Gevura. Those are the ones that are most familiar to us. Kindness, and he translates it judgment here, strictness, limitation, and underneath of them, in the middle, is Tiferes, beauty. He translates it. I would think splendor would be a better translation and use beauty for hod, but it doesn't matter. Nothing is really going to actually capture the idea here. One thing to notice is that God is called by many names in the Torah. And one question that one could reasonably have is, why are many names used? And Kabalah is answering this question, because the many names refer to different aspects of God. Chokhmah and Bina are at the top of the picture. Between them, and it doesn't come out very clearly on this picture, there's a little like a where they meet, and the line from Keter to Tiferes is at that node. There is, in some representations of Kabalah, das, Sephardic pronunciation, and the Chokhmah Bina das is the first initials of this are what is the basis of Chabad. So Chabad takes its name from a particular representation of the Sefirot, and it comes really later on. It's a 16th century innovation, as it were. from Luria, Lurianic Kabbalah. And by taking this name, Chabad is actually proclaiming that they're endorsing a particular interpretation of the Sphirot. And it's a sign of really how important Kabbalah is to Hasidism, but also to really many other aspects of traditional Judaism. Okay, on the traditional view, which is what is represented here, Chokhmah and Bina are two intellectual aspects, as I said. Dot is another one that sometimes, as I said, appears on the framework. So what's Chokhmah and what's Bina? So Chokhmah is the aha. When you do a math, solve a math problem, you get an initial insight and I got it. That's Chokhmah. Bina is, once you get the insight, it's not enough. You need to write it out as a proof. So Chokhmah is a one, and Bina is a plurality, a proof. And dot, when it appears, is the application. And that is, well, it goes from the more abstract and simple, the more complicated, to the more applied. And that's, in a way, the way that this schema works. The Keter is just completely undifferentiated. As we go down the scale, things get more complicated. So more complicated meaning more differentiated. And this system is repeated. They're usually said to be 4 different worlds. Each one looks like this. And to give you some sense of the basis for this, I'll just suggest that you think of different kinds of relationships that people have with each other. So there's the relationship that you might have with somebody who works at the grocery store. It's a kind of transactional relation. It's not a close relation. Compare that to the relation you have with a colleague, much closer. Compare that with the relation that you have with a collaborator. Compare that to the relation that you could have with a friend. Compare that to the relation that you could have with your spouse. Compare that to a deeper relation, a relation of that people talk about being soulmates. So this gives you some sense of the difference between a kind of closeness and a separation. And the idea of Kabbalah is that the world comes from something that's absolutely one, and it comes by degrees of separation. And what I said was kind of a way of understanding the separation. And the separation occurs within this schema, but also from this world to the next one. And you'll notice that the last thing here, Malkut, kingdom, is very similar to Keter, crown. So the difference is that you don't have the kingdom without the subjects, and the crown somehow exists really above everything else, but makes everything else possible. Okay, now one more idea here. This schema you need to use your a little bit of imagination here. First of all, let me notice that Malchus is the feminine, and the rest of the schema is the masculine. And the idea of the masculine and the feminine uniting is a central idea in Kabbalah. Let me try to put it this way. Whatever exists here in our physical world has a counterpart, an intellectual counterpart, that makes it possible for our physical relationships to occur. So the relationship between a man and a woman here is a physical relation, but it's also a spiritual and emotional relation. And that kind of relation is possible because within the Sefirot, there is a similar kind of relationship. Okay, now use your imagination here a little bit. You've probably seen pictures, I'm sure you've seen pictures of the constellations at some point. And I know them as, the Big Dipper and other little mnemonics to identify them, which I can barely do. The one thing that everybody, I think, can see is the belt of Orion. And the belt of Orion is 3 stars that seem to be in a line. And Orion was a Greek warrior. You need to use your imagination to see the stars as representing Orion. And I think it's the Big Dipper is the bear, and I'm not sure I'm getting this right, but in the same way, let's see. Yeah, okay. In the same way, what is in front of you here is a man. Almost everything. And here I'm saying use your imagination a little bit here. Keser Chochmah Bina, that's the head, the intellectual part. There's the 2 arms, Chesed Gevurah, the heart, Tiferes, the 2 legs, which are kind of extending down, and Yesod is the male sex organ, connected appropriately with the feminine, Malkut. And Malkut has within it all of the Sefirot, so that if there's a kind of repetition of the structure, the Malkut is called the Nukva, the feminine, but also the receiver. And the idea is that the light is emanating from God. It comes something like light. It's called light. Understanding however we're to understand light here, it comes somehow from God, and it forms this. It overflows. It emanates and overflows. It's captured by vessels, and the pictures, the dots here, the Chochmah Bina, these are all vessels. And the vessels hold the light, but the light overflows to the lower vessels. So there's a kind of overflow from God, from the one, into this separation. And it's the first emanation here that produces these first vessels, which are light, and there's light somehow engraved into light, which is a hard thing to wrap your mind around. That at first they're very relatively close together, and then Malkut is again a kind of source of emanation to the next world down, as it were, where the pattern repeats itself, except that the Sefirot are more separated from each other. And in this way, there's a kind of downward flow. So the question that I raised was, how is it that the plurality comes from a unity? And the answer that Kabalah gives is that there's an emanation from God, Ein Sof, without limit. We can't really even talk about what it is. It's really God. And it produces the, um, uh, 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 this representation, which is called, the first one is Adam Kadmon, the first man, the preliminary emanation. And that in turn gives rise to the next world and the next world down, and so forth, until we come to where we are. So on the one hand, Kabalah is a way of understanding creation. Now, the other problem that I raised, how is it that we are to understand the mitzvot and what's actually happening here? This system, which I've been describing as a downward flow, it's also possible to have an upward flow. What we do affects the cosmos, as it were, by affecting the relationships among the. So when we make Havdalah, we align the Sefirot in a way that they should be aligned in. And this idea of realigning the Sefirot is the basis of a phrase that's probably familiar to you in other contexts, Tikkun Olam. Tikkun is it's a Kabbalistic phrase, and it means repairing the world, because the world gets misaligned. And it gets misaligned because people don't always do the things that they should be doing. This idea of possibility to transform the world, not just yourself, as Maimonides said, but the whole world by doing a mitzvah, is it's a powerful idea, and it gives a kind of inner meaning to the activity of doing a mitzvah. So I'll mention that there are three kind of principal works. There are many, really thousands of Kabbalistic works, but three principal works that are the basis of Kabbalah. And one of them is a book called Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation. And Yetzirah is one of the worlds. It's the first kind of identifiable world after the world of Atzilus. But Sefer Yetzirah is, it's written in Hebrew, and it's sort of like reading the Mishnah in the Talmud. Very short sentences, very brief, cryptic claims that are made. And one of the central ideas of Sefer Yetzirah is a mode of thinking that I want to. I just want to mention. I don't want to go on too long here. I could talk for hours about this, as you probably noticed, but I don't want to try your patience. But there is in Sefer Yetzirah a really central idea that we understand the world by understanding the patterns that repeat themselves. So we're used to a causal account of the world. I take the cue stick and I hit the billiard ball and it moves because I've imparted some force into it, some momentum, and the billiard ball, and we tend to see the world in a causal way. The Kabbalah way of thinking is, let's find the pattern. And the patterns are, once you start seeing them, they're really all over the place. I just explained, looking at this schema here as a man. It's also it can also be seen as a face. Again, you need to use your imagination. And not only that, within each particular character of the face, there's still something else. So the seven spherot can be divided into further faces. And so you have the Keter here, the two eyes, and then there's the nose and the mouth. Okay, and you can find the same pattern within. And this pattern is also a pattern is imitated in the cosmos. So there, and it's well, I'll give you a modern version of the same way of thinking here. We have an atom that has a nucleus, and there are electrons around the nucleus. And this pattern is the same pattern as the solar system that has the sun at the center and the planets and other things that are going around it. It's if you think it's important that the pattern is the same, then you're on your way to Kabalah thinking. So and within each pattern, if you cut off a piece, you have the same pattern, and that's what we call a holograph. So, okay, so Sefer Yetzirah emphasizes the patterns. There's another book of Kabbalah which you've heard about called the Zohar, and the Zohar begins with a long introduction about the nature of good and evil, and then it settles down and becomes throughout a kind of biblical commentary. So it starts with the words of the Torah, and it proposes ways to understand them, but it proposes ways like the Gemara does. Somebody says this and somebody says that, and so one quick example that we saw in the Torah readings that Jacob gets the blessing from Isaac, and his brother is not too happy about it, and Jacob decides he'd better get out of town quickly, and the Torah says Jacob left for the east. And the Zohar is really worried, what does it mean that Jacob left for the east? It's worried about it in terms of the structure here, because Jacob maybe he's Tiferes, and maybe his going to the east meant that this structure was misaligned. But maybe also Jacob is not Tiferes. Maybe we're really talking about that, Hod moving to the east. There's a debate in the Zohar, and the debate is somewhat parallel to the kinds of debates that we find in the Talmud, except that the Talmudic debates are about practical things generally, and the Zohar debate is about things that are not so practical. So I'm going to stop here. I think I've probably gone on way too long. I've exhausted I'm afraid. But I'll just stop and give you a chance to ask questions.
Maybe we can all unmute ourselves, and if you have a question, feel free to speak up.
Ed? Hi, it's Elliot.
Hi, Elliot.
I thought one purpose of the Kabbalah was to enable individuals to go sort of up the chain and somehow get closer to God, develop some sort of unity with God. And is that correct? Yes. Or is that sort of a modern interpretation?
No, yes, it's absolutely correct. When I talked about doing the mitzvahs to realign the sefirot, that's part of it. That as you meditate on the nature of the world, or as you do a mitzvah and think about the inner significance of the mitzvah, you elevate yourself and you come to a deeper connection. And that's something I should have spent more time with. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Ed, this is Mel.
Hi, Mel.
That was awesome, and I have
Thank you.
I have many questions, but I won't bore everybody with all of them. It just strikes me as when you talk about Jacob going to the east, and you look at the yoga interpretation of the Kundalini rising up through the chakras to the crown, something happened there where the two came together, but we won't go there now. In the beginning, you said something. You said the Sephirot are changing all the time. I didn't understand what that meant. What does that mean? They're changing.
Well, they occupy different positions. So it's a great question. What does it mean for something? What does it mean for Chesed and Gevura to change their relationship to each other? And that's it's and okay. So what happens when Chesed and Gevura, when they separate? How do you we have the picture, and the picture is a physical representation of something that's not physical. So it's hard, what does it mean when they're not quite aligned together? In the beginning of the Zohar, the temple has been destroyed, and the Zohar is trying to figure out what actually happened that led to destruction of the temple. And there was some sort of sin that changed the alignment of the Sefirot. I'm going to try to be clear about this. I'm going to be clear about how unclear this is. The Zohar is written in language it's beautiful Aramaic. It's very ornate, flowery, and it doesn't directly refer to the Sefirot. So I gave you the picture, but it's not like you can open up the Zohar and find the picture there. This is the crib sheet that helps you prepare for the exam. This is what it's all about, except it's not in the book. And it's a challenge to actually see the different possibilities. So there's different possibilities of representation of evil and good, and there's are they separated, or are they intertwined? They somehow there's a debate about how they're connected with each other. Sometimes people do things that are just terrible, but they're good somehow. They end up being good, and that interconnection of good and evil is really a Kabbalistic idea. So I don't think I've answered your question, but
Yes, thank you. If I can just have one quick follow-up or two. I'm sorry, but do the colors mean anything of each Sephirot, of each of the Sephirot?
yes, yeah, each one is connected with colors. Everything. This is a world. The world of Kabbalah is a world where everything means something. Every detail that you can imagine means something. And everything in the world that we experience is it's a reflection of something that's higher and deeper. And the higher and the deeper character of the colors, we see the colors, but the colors represent something the colors that we see represent some aspect of reality that is higher. The person, just to mention, the person I learned with was actually had studied physics at Berkeley, and he got interested in Kabbalah, but he compared it to the system of elementary particles in physics. Wow. You have and Aryeh Kaplan, I mentioned, also was a physicist. He was a prominent Kabbalist. But the physicists discovered these properties of elementary particles that they didn't know what to name them. They started naming them things like charm and there are other, I'm not remembering the other names now, but there are other things that you think you understand them, but obviously they have no connection with charm as we understand it. But on the other hand, our notion of charm is it somehow derives from something that's higher. It is a physical or spiritual human manifestation of a higher relationship, a relationship between the sphere of.
I have
Yeah.
a question, Ed.
Hi.
Is anyone else next? Hi, this is Lizzie Saltz.
Hi.
Your answer to that last question kind of touched on this kind of almost silly question I have, but my uncle was a very California guy and very into lots of new agey things as well as Judaism and Kabbalism. And he was sort of a guide in some ways to a lot of LA people who were, maybe sort of celebrity types. And it just seems like of all of the Jewish traditions, Kabbalism seems to appeal to like, Madonna and Gaga and like a million people, whatever. And I just kind of wonder, is it the predeterminism? Like, what is it why is that so, it's sort of populist corruption of the spirituality? And I don't know, I just was wondering what you thought of that.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of Kabbalah light. It's Kabbalah is a really serious intellectual study, and it's a spiritual study, but it does have these aspects connected with it of meditation and spirituality, and what Elliot was saying before, the kind of techniques of coming closer to godliness, and as it's presented traditionally, it's long and difficult. But the California version is short and nice. The Madonna version of it, I don't know. I may be doing Madonna an injustice. I don't know. She may be, for all I know, she spends her days and nights learning the
Go out on a limb and say that you are not doing her an injustice.
Edward, this is Roy. In many religious systems, there is an ecstatic reaching for God. And somehow in my mind, I had Kabbalah related to that. Am I mistaken?
No, I guess I wasn't ecstatic enough in my presentation here. But, that's definitely an aspect of it, but it's the sort of thing that is.
You just answered my question.
Oh, really?
Okay, it's long and difficult, and it's also, as I understand it, it's much more intellectual than someone like Madonna seems to be capable of on the surface. It's the sort of thing that you. Let me put it this way. There was a Greek philosopher whose name was Plotinus, who was influenced by Plato, and Plotinus talks a lot about the one and connecting with the one, and it's nothing that you can actually be described because you can't say it. The one of Plotinus is very much like God in Kabbalah. And the kinds of things that Plotinus talks about, many people say that the guy is just a mystic. He's talking about communing with the one. The reason I'm bringing this up is that it is fully intellectual. And it's a way of using the intellect to get to what Kabbalah and Plotinus and other people would say. It's beyond the intellect. But I want to make a distinction between using the intellect to go beyond the intellect, to find some sort of communion, connection, ecstatic relationship with something that's beyond, and trying to get there kind of California style shortcut. What we get from a lot of people who claim to be studying Kabbalah is the shortcut version of this, rather than the hard intellectual work that is more traditional for Kabbalah.